So I'm speaking with composer Ronit Kirchman, whose versatility as a storyteller has landed her titles in addition to composer, such as music producer, songwriter, singer, and multi-instrumentalist. You've heard her playing on scores such as The Finest Hours, Now You See Me, and Jezebel, and Ring of Fire. As a composer, she has been behind the scores for Zen and the Art of Dying, Finding Neighbors, The Skin I'm In, and many more. Her most recent score is for the critically acclaimed miniseries The Sinner, which is airing on USA and stars Jessica Biel and Bill Pullman. Ronit, thank you so much for speaking today.
Thanks for having me.
So, to start off, I'd really love to know kind of how you found your path into music, and at what point in your life did you kind of gravitate towards composing for visual media? Was it always a goal to compose for film and television, or that kind of did you kind of discover that later on?
Um, I've always been kind of immersed in music from a young age. I started playing violin when I was 4, so that was the start of my formal training.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's interesting. I unearthed some old recordings from my childhood, and I think I found some of the secrets to my chosen path as a film composer there. Um, I had I was in a summer camp for musical youth in middle school, and I had roped a fellow pianist camper into an improvisation, which was a narrative improvisation. I wrote some text, and it was kind of a structured timeline, and there was kind of a basically a live score to the story that we performed.
Wow, that's awesome.
It was kind of wild to find it. So, I mean, I think on some level that um, kind of instinctual desire to blend stories and songs and music has always been there for me, both both the underscore and the songs. I remember as a kid being very drawn in by any kind of animated musicals.
Mm,
I know it's kind of a very different genre from, for example, The Sinner, but on some level, I think just that thing of having um, story bring together all of the senses, I think has always been with me.
right.
Um, and you know, I think in terms of the concrete professional stuff, um, after college, I went to Yale and I was classical violinist there and composing, and um, I started writing music for theater in New York, and I found again that kind of environment where people who think in slightly different modes were working together to create something, like directors, actors, composer. Um, that felt very stimulating to me, and I think that was the that kind of laid the groundwork for moving into film scoring.
Right. So when did you kind of make the transition to come to LA and just kind of go like head dive right into it?
Well, I moved to LA to go to grad school at Cal Arts,
Mm,
and I was in the at the time it was called the Composition and New Media program. So it was definitely there's a focus for me on algorithmic composition, some pretty esoteric computer music topics.
oh
Uh,
wow.
the nice thing about the program there is you can really, you know, you're focused on something, but you're definitely encouraged and allowed to spread your wings in other areas too. So I was able to do a lot of improvisation. I played in groups with Leo Smith and um, took sargam and some West African music. And,
Wow.
there's so much going on there, even the things that you're not formally studying, you're influenced by. There's Balinese music and people playing Balkan music and Brazilian music. So that was kind of what I was doing for grad school. And I think I felt so comfortable um, with the narrative collaboration thing that I kind of specifically kind of laid it out for myself that I was going to focus a lot on the nuts and bolts of different musical languages while I was in grad school. Um, but I started to score shorts, you know, right, kind of overlapping with that time period. And when I finished grad school, I started scoring shorts pretty much right away. So my grad school focus and my interest in film music were kind of um, happening at the same time, but uh, I guess culturally differentiated at the time.
Wow, yeah. So, kind of growing up, did you kind of gravitate towards any typical styles or genres of music that kind of influenced your own style? Any specific composers or musicians or singers?
Um, well, I definitely am a believer that everything we take in, everything we hear is an influence.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some threads um, that, kind of emerged early. Like, definitely my classical training is in my bones, from age 0 through now. But at the same time, I always felt that, that wasn't it. A lot of times in the classical education system, at least at the time that I was growing up, it was a little bit closed. I think it's opening up a lot more now.
Mm.
But I found that just like, improvised in the blues and country music and rock and pop, all those things felt very natural to me. Um, and I also, at the same time, like certain, I'm not a huge fan of the word avant-garde, but
Mm-hmm.
contemporary classical composers and experimental composers like Xenakis and Cage and Ligeti and, stuff that was Schoenberg's, stuff that was very, not in the tonal box and had um, kind of was about thinking about music in terms of a little bit of a macro generative structure, going beyond just, you write a piece and you play it and it's, uh, getting a little more philosophical about it, I
Right.
guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always that appealed to me. I remember sitting in the car and, insisting that we stay on the really out there classical piece that no one wanted. Um, so, so yeah, and then, I've found I, a lot of it is like you find you resonate with things that you don't have an explanation for. Um,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, um, when I hear certain Malian artists like Umu Sangare, like it just sounds, it like speaks to my soul. There are things that I didn't grow up with but feel somehow resonant. So definitely jazz, just the that the understanding in jazz that the song is always evolving and kind of you're always thinking around it and recreating it. And I feel like jazz is just the way it is on some level. Like that's the mind,
Right.
Every think about the song, we're replaying it in a different way. So, all those things. And I think the more I, met people who were practicing in different styles and genres, I kind of found more compatriots. Um, and I would say that in my early years, um, you didn't see a lot of improvising violinists. Like that whole world was felt kind of like not connected with a lot of the the threads of things that interested me. So it's been very heartening to see that I think a lot of threads are coming together in people's awareness now. Music.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk about kind of your approach as a storyteller. And this could be for any project. When you're hired on a project and it's time to kind of write that first note, where does that first note come from? Like, what pulls that first idea out of you? Do you usually look at do you like to read the script? Do you like to watch a first cut of the film? Do you like to just focus on the characters or anything particular that really kind of speaks to you?
Well, I'm a big fan of diving in as soon as I'm able, and that depends. Sometimes people will approach me and it's already a rough cut. Um, in the case of The Sinner, I did get to read the pilot script before it got shot.
Oh, that's
Uh,
great. Yeah.
and so there's something really cool about making, and then I like to just I'm immediately kind of taking notes into my phone and like setting up palettes and trying out stuff. And some of that material I end up carrying forward into the project and some not. But I just feel like um, the more you know, drive space is cheap, right? These days.
Yep.
So it's like there's no reason to not just like engage and start making stuff as part of thinking about it. And I love the that little open window before there's footage just to kind of feel the void a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, it becomes definitely much more concrete and I think easier to know um, which ideas are going to fit in the world once you see footage and performances. Um, like it does end up being a really concrete product, and that matters. But it's definitely enjoyable to have a little kind of free roaming time with the script beforehand, if it's possible.
Right. So let's talk about The Sinner. When you came onto this miniseries, what were the, I guess, the initial discussions of what the music should be, what the score should be, and I guess what was your goal for what you wanted to do, or what you ended up doing musically?
Well, it's kind of cool because Derek, the showrunner, what he was looking for musically is kind of a zone where I really enjoy operating. Like he wanted not to go totally conventional, but he still wanted it to be an entertaining show to watch. So, kind of playing with convention and occasionally going outside the box. Having kind of a contemporary sound, interesting timbres created from scratch, a hybrid of um, electronic sounds and acoustic sounds, but again, kind of looking for extended techniques or timbres that are not kind of uh, that usual.
Right.
Um, all with, the nice thing is not just kind of like just cause, but um, in large part because hopefully that'll have the desired effect of um, people paying attention when they're watching, not necessarily knowing what they're going to hear next or see next. And also, with all that said, also being able to tap into the emotion of certain moments for sure. Um, so it's kind of there are a few roles that the music ends up playing, and I think that that was clear from the beginning. Definitely pacing and kind of overall mood, but also a window into the inner lives of the characters.
Right. And yeah, of course. And our main protagonist is Cora, played by Jessica Biel, and I love kind of the style, the electronic acoustic style you went with for the score, and something about the music just felt very psychological to me, and it complements, I think, her journey. Was she a kind of an interesting character to crack musically?
Yeah, for a lot of reasons. One is that she the layers of opacity to us and herself. Um, and I in preparing, I obviously have been reading the scripts ahead. I read the book. I know the outlines of um, how the plot develops, even though there are definitely significant differences between the book and the series.
Right.
Um, but kind of playing with what we can sense from the outside and maybe what's going on inside as distinct or hidden from that. Um, I don't know that there's a cue for cue translation that I could give you of that,
Mm-hmm.
but that it informs my choices. Um, Even when she's there are interesting discussions we had around. I don't want to be spoilers, but
Right.
this episode has aired, for example, so it's probably okay to talk about it.
Sure.
Um, in episode 2, she tells a story that feels like it's true, and she's revealing something, and it turns out that it's kind of partially a lie, at least partially. And so the question of how much to go with her story on that was a discussion we had. And I think in the end, we did kind of go on the ride with her. And I think that was the right choice because then it is quite a shock to find out that it's not true.
Right.
Like, very alienating, actually, if you're going with the character on, this. what ends up being a tall tale that's very emotional, um, and you're moved by it and you feel for her, and then you find out that she lied, then you feel distanced from her. And I know that, reading some, I try not to read too many reviews while I'm working, but some critical and some fan responses of like, oh, I don't know if I like her. And I think that um, in a way, the show's all about that, getting on board with that, like how well do you know people, and that distancing and coming closer that happens. Uh, it's kind of amplified in a disturbing way in this series, but it's kind of one of the facts of relationships in general, I think.
Right. Um, so since this is a mini series, it's 8 episodes and it has a conclusion. Did you kind of approach this? Are you approaching it, I guess, one episode at a time, or did you kind of Did you get a kind of a sense of the arc of all 8 episodes and kind of structure the score, kind of like one big kind of film in a way?
Well, I mean, a little bit of both in that I'm reading the scripts ahead and I've been watching episodes ahead. Um, the final episodes were, it just wrapped not long ago, so it
Right.
wasn't possible to literally see cuts for everything from the very beginning, but it was possible to know the basics, right? So, um, in terms of literally writing cues for later on episodes, the schedule didn't totally allow for that. Up front, I kind of, did a little bit on episodes 2 and 3 while I was working, finishing up the pilot. Um, but then, things kind of mushed into a very compressed schedule where you're like turning around an episode a week. So,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. TV schedules are brutal.
Um, but that said, like we talk about how we're setting things up for episode 7, even though we haven't completed it yet.
Right.
Um, it's definitely in terms of the structural and conceptual planning, definitely it is happening in terms of the arc. Then the kind of cue by cue writing is happening more kind of in the flow of the production schedule.
Right. So for the show and kind of in general for the whole experience, has anything been kind of that you found to be a particular challenge as a composer to tackle, or was there something that kind of maybe threw you for a loop that you had to kind of think about a couple times before you kind of found the answer?
Um, I think like the biggest challenge and joy at the same time
Right.
is I know that might be a common way to start this answer, but it actually really is true in this case. The tonal balance is like we're calibrating it with very, very, very fine gradations. So I think that's been the kind of biggest, yeah, that's been the biggest challenge and thing
Right.
to pay attention to. And I don't know, I guess like baseline, I'm of, like the reason why we get into this kind of business is because we don't mind doing a V2 to find the right fit. So
Exactly. It's part of the
I'm,
process.
yeah, so I don't get like, to me, like, oh, like we need to hone in even more on just the right color. To me, is kind of part of why I'm in it in the first place. So I don't find that um, like a bummer.
Oh no,
It's,
yeah,
you know,
but I think tone, especially on a show like this where it's such a heavy subject matter, I feel like it could be very easy to do too much musically. That's to find a kind of a good balance of what the music is doing and not overdoing it and overplaying things. So I'm sure that was a challenge. Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, and it's kind of along the lines of what I was telling you about with that that cue from episode 2 is just like figuring out when we want to be really with the character's POV, when we want to pull back a little bit, when we want to drive, even pacing wise,
Mm.
lay back. Um, so yeah, so that's fun.
Well, I guess on the other side of it, what was the most rewarding thing about the project for you personally?
I mean, it's the number one show on cable so far this year. So knowing that, whatever 4 million people are seeing it every week, that's definitely, a larger audience than I've had in the past. And that's very gratifying just because I love, like, the idea that people are getting into the story, and I know when I'm really into a show, it adds to my life, so I
Right.
feel like in in my very kind of world of the imagination way, like the idea that maybe I'm kind of adding something fun to millions of people's weeks is cool.
Yeah, that's cool, and you are doing that, and congrats, yeah, on the it's critically acclaimed, and everyone's loving it. So that's such a congratulations on the whole team of the show team coming together to make such a great show.
Yeah, yeah, it's really great to be a part of it. I was gonna say, like, the team, the whole production team is so dedicated to making each show as great as can be. Um, it's just you couldn't ask for a better attitude or work environment in that sense. So
That's awesome.
I would
Yeah,
say that's also, that's kind of part of the package. I would say that's a big part of what I'm enjoying as well. It's just
right.
like team spirit.
Well, to wrap things up, I always like to ask composers this one question: if you could score a film, any film ever made, pretending
Mm.
the original score never existed, no offense to the original composer, what movie would you pick?
Ah, let me think. Do I have a moment?
Yeah,
You,
take your time. I've had people pause for like 2 minutes.
um, hmm.
I guess the idea of the question is what kind of playground would you like to play in? Well, like,
Huh. This is going to sound a little insane.
uh-huh.
Because I'm, the first thing that popped into my mind is something that it's like you'd want to score it, but of course you'd never play the score for anybody because it's iconic and
Right.
forever. But like, but like, I think it would be amazing to rescore Star Wars for my own kicks,
Yeah, great answer.
Um, as I said, like that would be something that I kept in my studio. But yeah, I think that the probably I thought of it just because it's so iconic and so part of our mythical consciousness.
Right.
That that would be a great challenge, just to see. I think it's so burned in that it would be a challenge to open one's mind to hear something new there. So that would be
Exactly.
cool.
Yeah, it would be interesting just to try to come at it at a clean slate when I mean, you can't really separate it from John Williams' score, but it'd be a great playground to play in for sure. Well, Ronit, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It was such a pleasure to chat with you and kind of get into your process. And congrats on the success of the center. And I just can't wait to hear what comes next.
Thank you so much, Kai. It's been really fun.
Great.